You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. This is Ben Wolf. As always, your host. We're going to talk with our guest today on the topic of what is decentralized leadership. Ask everybody to make you aware that for those of you who are fractional leaders, fractional executives, the fractional leadership community has an event coming up hosted by Rob Dubay in November. On the 10 disciplines it takes, a personal and professional life to really maximize your energy. It's based on some work by Gino Wickman, articulated in his book, The EOS Life. So Rob Dubay, his partner, is delivering that. So for those of you who are members of fractional leadership, you're invited to attend. You'll get details about that. And for those of you who are fractional executives but not members of fractional leadership, I invite you to check it out at fractionalleadership.io to see what's involved in being part of that community, and certainly hopefully have time to be able to attend that event if you do end up joining. So with that, I want to get into introducing our guest today. He is the founder of the Fractional CMO franchise, Fractional CMO firm called Your CMO, YORCMO. He's also the co-founder of another group of fractional executives called the Fractional Professionals Association. He's one of the co-founders of that. You can find out more about him and some of the stuff, at least he's up to, at yourcmo.com. That's YORCMO.com. And with that, I give you Joe Frost. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be on your show, and excited to talk about all things fractional and decentralized, and excited to hear about your event coming up too. That sounds like energy's been something I've been studying a bunch recently for myself, and I think that it's the secret to good leadership is having a strong source of energy and being able to understand it better and how you bring it to your relationships and opportunities. And for me personally, it's awareness of triggers, when my energy either gets challenged and lowered, and knowing what causes that and when it causes it, and how I bring it back up. So I'm a fan of energy.
It's good stuff. And I think it's also related to the concept of confidence as well. If you see, when you do things where your confidence gets lower, it's draining. It's draining of energy. And when you're doing things and living in a way, or spending your time on things that give you energy, it also gives you confidence. Or you do things that give you more confidence, it also gives you energy. I think the two concepts are connected, probably, but.
Yeah, I think they have. I would think the same. I would think there's some connection there, but never done any specific studies or seen anything, but it would make
scientific
sense. Yeah.
So let me ask you, before we get going and talking about, decentralized leadership, fractional leadership, and other related topics, if you don't mind, give us a quick 2-minute background, a quick context for like how, you got to be talking about this topic, and like how you got to be where you are, and as well talking about decentralized leadership.
Yeah, well, it's I'm a victim of many business owners of marketing PTSD. There's so many people that I know that have gone in and worked with a marketing agency, or worked with a marketing consultant, or hired a marketing person, and just not got what they expected. And I have heard the horror stories, and I had them myself, and I affectionately call it marketing PTSD, because it puts us in a state of shock and in many cases distrust. So I had that experience 12, probably 14 years ago, and that led me down a journey to build a fractional CMO company. I didn't quite know it back then that I was on that journey, but it took me 12 years. And what I realized is that 6 years ago, there were so many companies that were looking for strategic, trusted marketing leadership, and the options were very slim to none out there. We applied the fractional model to marketing, built a process, and now we're able to help clients with building trust in their marketing partner through a proven process and a valuable expert or CMO. that whole project, morphed into your CMO as a franchise. And now we help other CMOs that want to get into marketing and do it the way we're doing it for their clients. But it also opened my eyes up to all the fractional world out there. Like, this is the trend that businesses need to be open to. It's the greatest opportunity I see, is tapping into fractional leadership. And it's the trend that most leaders are looking for themselves. If you look at all the research, and I don't know if the pandemic caused it, but certainly since the pandemic, there are more and more executives that are looking to get out of the rat race of corporate world, have lots and lots of experience to bring, and want to go out and consult. But they don't want to do it differently. They still want to be part of somebody's team. They don't want to just advice and walk away. They want to be hands-on, making things happen. And the fractional executive role allows different disciplines to do just that. And so we started the Fractional Professional Association a couple of years ago because we wanted to broaden our network of fractionals. And you've been part of that for a while now, and we share members with both organizations. It's an emerging, growing business model for solo practitioners that want to offer their services in a fractional way. And it's really then led me to this discovery of what I call decentralized leadership, because decentralized leadership means to me leadership at all levels. And if we start with the premise that everyone is a leader throughout the organization, that's what decentralized leadership is. A practical fractional CMO or CTO or integrator is likely not on site ever. If they are, very seldom. So they're remote from day one generally. They're virtual almost with all their interactions. So they are physically decentralized from the mothership, working remotely, hybrid. But the difference between any work before this, I think before fractional that was remote, is it wasn't what would be considered executive leadership. Fractional is an executive leader that is remote. So it's forced us to think about how do we lead remotely versus work remotely. And that's the work that I've been discovering and working around decentralized leadership. When we've applied it to fractional CMOs and we built all our processes and systems around our business to be able to offer that service, it dawned on me a couple of years ago or a year or so ago that if we think about all members of our team as leaders, the same concepts that we're building for the fractional CMO executive apply to a person in the Philippines that's doing more tactical work. But if we think of that person as a leader also, what are the things that we're doing at the CMO level that we could be applied to their level? And it's not a lower level, it's just a different level.
Like what? What do you mean by that? Like what?
Well, I'll give you some examples of the things that we've done differently since thinking that way. If you look at let's talk US, because we're very familiar with the US language. If you look at
although not everybody in the audience necessarily will be.
Fair enough. So we have a weekly meeting. It's an L10, and it cascades down from a leadership executive level to departments and teams and divisions, et cetera. Well, we've had a sales and marketing weekly meeting for years. And traditionally that's been the leader of that team has run that meeting. Well, when we started thinking about, all right, if we're all leaders on this team, what's one thing we can do? We simply rotate a different leader of that meeting monthly. That one small change, by rethinking how we're viewing the individuals on that team as not members of the team that report to the leader, as leaders, having a team of leaders, that just one little thing allowed everybody on that team to start having to act and think like a CMO would have to do in a boardroom as the example there. So they have to come prepared. They have to have the agenda up to date. They have to lead the meeting and facilitate it. And it's not natural and something they've ever done before in this particular case. But when they step up and they have the opportunity to do that in a safe environment, they shine and they love it. And it literally is building leadership an individual at a time that way. Just that one.
How do you prepare people? Because imagine if you just say like, okay, next week we're gonna have, John's gonna lead or Jane is gonna lead next week or for the next month, next week, then I don't know, it may not go well, or maybe, how do you prepare people to so that they're ready to do that successfully?
Well, for that particular thing,
let's say leading meetings. I mean, it's a good example.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
So let's say that
example
of rotating every month, that who's going to lead the next 4 meetings every month.
We gave them 1 week notice and a sample agenda, and they showed up and led. That might not be the best answer. It was the answer, and it works as long as the people on the team are willing to help and support and have grace and understanding that we're all going to have to be in this spot sometime in the next year. It's a rotating once a month, a different leader. Everybody's empathetic, everybody's supportive, because they're going to be on the hot seat a month from now. It's not, and they've all been in a meeting for several months. Like, this is not their first ever meeting to show up to. So they understand generally how it should go.
Right.
So it wasn't that far removed. And as long as they had a templated agenda with a little bit of instruction, like, this is the part that you can customize and this is the part that we need to keep the same. I've done it now 7 different teams, the exact same approach.
Right.
And every single time the leader showed up, prepared, and delivered a good meeting, effective meeting. There was no additional training needed.
Right. Oh, very cool. Very, very interesting. That's helpful. It gives me a lot to think about and think where, where we could possibly apply that.
Yeah, it's an interesting spin. It all does what I think it all also is dependent upon the ownership or the senior executive leadership truly wanting decentralized leadership.
Right.
And when I say that there are companies that will say, yeah, we want everybody to be a leader, but do you? I mean, do you really want to allow somebody in the Philippines making leadership level decisions for your company? And how are you going to put some parameters around what decisions they can and cannot make?
Right.
And a lot of times the answer is no. I don't want anybody outside of the U.S. To make those. But okay,
well, what kind of decisions typically would we be wanting them to make? Let's say in that example of a team member or members in the Philippines. What's some examples of the kinds of decisions that you've seen that if leadership is willing, is appropriate and good to give them that autonomy?
Yeah, I don't want to. I'll answer the question, but I do not want to use the Philippines as a reason not to consider the answer. So swap Philippines with Kansas. All right, we've got a person in Kansas that's decentralized from the mothership. How much authority do you want to give somebody in that position as a leader to make decisions? And so what we've done is very fortunate to come across a book called Fierce Conversations. And
I got to read that. I've heard that so many times. I've got to read that. I read Netflix, No Rules, talking about, and concepts of radical candor and things like that. But it's probably a similar concept, but I think I need to read that book.
Yeah, Michelle Hecken is a EO member, Entrepreneurs Organization member, and she speaks about offboarding yourself as an owner. So it's really fundamental in her work that she does as a consultant. And she referenced this book, and I grabbed it. And there's a metaphor, analogy, however you say it, of decisions like a tree. So a decision tree, think of that as your metaphor. And there are 4 types of decisions. There are leaf decisions, branch decisions, trunk decisions, and root decisions. And so the way the story is told is that a leaf, if you pull a leaf off a tree, you're not going to kill it. You can make leaf decisions every day, all day long, and never tell anybody in the organization about it. That is fine. That's a leaf decision. A branch, you break a branch, you're going to harm the tree a bit, not too much. You can make that decision every day, all day long, but tell somebody that you made that decision. And that tell somebody can come several different ways. The trunk decisions, you're axing into the trunk, you're going to do some major damage, making some wounds there. That's a decision that you should make with at least one other person. So together you make trunk decisions. And then ultimately root decisions, you're going to kill the tree if you damage the roots too much. Those are the collaborative decisions. And that analogy then gives you a common language and a framework to talk to the teams then. Okay, what are the leaf decisions that you can make? What are the branch decisions that you can also make? Just report in weekly in your updates. What's the trunk decisions and ultimately root decisions that we need to make together or in pairs. And so every team can set those parameters, and over time it's an iterative process likely to get to where those thresholds lie, but it's a common language for having that happen. Budget's an easy one. Here's the budget dollar that's a leaf, and here's a budget dollar that's a
Right.
branch and trunk. But the more complex ones are, if you make this decision, is it going to harm the tree? How much harm is it going to do? And being okay with people making decisions that others disagree with, and having a safe place to do a debrief and review those decisions is the second part of that. So.
No, that's very helpful. I want to ask something else in a second, but first, just to understand what you mean, and this is a part where my brain gets a little foggy in understanding what you're speaking about with decentralized leadership. I think that asking the question this way might be helpful to help me understand it. So if we imagine a Venn diagram, where one circle is the concept of decentralized leadership, the other circle is the concept of fractional leadership, and there's a place where the two meet, or where they're combined, where it's the same thing, in other words, sort of. So I guess what's in the fractional leadership circle purely, what's purely in the decentralized leadership circle conceptually, and what is and to what extent, or what's the area where they're combined, meaning where they're kind of synonymous in some way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that the large circle is the decentralized circle, and the fractional leadership is squarely or roundly inside.
So you wouldn't put it as a Venn
circle.
diagram. You would put it as a general category, and fractional leadership as a subcategory.
Yes.
Of the concept of decentralized leadership.
Yeah, that's how I would picture it. I don't think there's anything a fractional leader does that is not decentralized in that sense.
Okay. So maybe put it this way then. What is within the subcategory of fractional leadership, and what aspects of decentralized leadership are outside of part of the general category, but not part of the fractional leadership category?
Yeah. So I would say that off the top of my head, there are decentralized leadership concepts that probably wouldn't apply always to a fractional leader. That might be around the remote work, as an example. Not all fractional leadership has to be remote. There are people that show up at an office one day a week and do that work, and fractional CFO.
You could have decentralized leadership divorced from remote also, meaning you could have decentralized leadership that's not remote, right?
That's what I mean. You can have it remote or not a remote, but in theory,
but not just fractional that's remote or not remote, even decentralized leadership. Couldn't that also be not remote? Because if you have an office with 100 people in it, but you're not having them report on various details because you've empowered them or given them the autonomy to lead in certain ways, that could be just as much in person as it is remote.
Yes, true. And now we're getting into a game of circles and logic. So, what's the subset of this and the set of this? But there are definitely aspects of decentralized leadership that wouldn't apply to all fractional engagements. Remote may or may not be, I'd have to get out I do have a degree in chemical engineering, so I can go there with some extreme logic, but
Oh
I have to get a
gosh.
pad of paper out and start sketching to make
Yeah,
it
I'm
make
not a very
sense.
visual person, so
Yeah.
I'm not good at that kind of stuff.
Another one, I think there are, uh, I'd have to, I'm going to work on this because I think that's a really good question, and it will set up a really nice blog about
Yeah.
differences
I have
between
a nice
fractional
diagram in there.
and centralized. Yes. So, what are the decentralized things that may not apply to fractional? This
Right.
is definitely a good
Well,
one.
make sure to tag me in that so I can
Oh, I will. It's a great
I can
question.
see it. I'll see it and share it. Let me ask you this in terms of playing around with this from another angle. What does it look like when somebody's focused on being centralized, right? The opposite of decentralized. Someone's not embracing that. Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What happens?
Well, I think the centralized leadership is what we all are very familiar with as traditional leadership. It's hierarchical, so it comes from the top, cascades down. There's a reporting mechanism. People aren't willing to always make decisions without asking permission. Um, geographically, probably traditionally it's more centralized, but there can be a lot of remote organizations that have a very top-down leadership model. Um, Whereas decentralized, once again, it starts with the concept that everyone at every level is a leader, and how do you allow them to lead in their own way? Whereas there's a lot of maybe micromanagers, as a good example, that don't want their people to lead underneath them. They just want people to follow the rules and stay in their lanes and not be leaders in their own rights.
Hmm.
That's a cultural thing, maybe more than an organizational thing. That's an individual management issue rather than necessarily a structural issue. Um, but that's the concept we're all very comfortable with and familiar with.
Hmm.
And I think that the whole decentralized phenomenon came about with the blockchain and the idea of ledgers and being able to track things remotely, or decentralized in a way that could be transparent and authenticated without concern. That's the decentralized blockchain. Well, if you apply that to leadership and decision making, kind of the core leadership trait that I think is the most hard for people to wrap their heads around. How do we not do it centralized? The more you can put transparency and documentation around decision making and letting everybody within the organization understand those decisions that are happening away from the mothership, the more comfortable everyone gets that those decisions can be made. If they're still made in a vacuum or in a silo and no information is shared, it's very difficult for people
Yeah.
to embrace this type of leadership. And the larger the organization gets, the harder and harder it is um, to be transparent without
Right.
nauseating WhatsApp notices and Teams notices and documents and 5,000 different pings you get a week. I don't need to know every decision you made. I just want to know that I can go find that decision somehow, some way, somewhere
Right.
when I need it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, transparency. Yeah, that is key. So last question um, is to also make it a little more concrete for me, for people listening to this. What the concept means is, tell me a story, an example, somebody that adopted this concept of decentralized leadership, whether it's one of the companies you've been involved in, or your company, or whoever. Uh, what's a story, an example, somebody that's adopted this concept? Like, what was it like before? What did they do to adopt it? What did it look like after?
Yeah. Well, I will. I can tell you the stories of how we're doing it internally, but I don't think that's as effective. So, the organization that comes to mind, it's a friend of mine. She runs a 8 to 10 person interior design firm, and they have historically struggled with gaining kind of alignment and clarity and teamwork. They have tried bringing in different consultants. They have implemented in the past variations of EOS, kind of do it yourself, do it with an implementer. but they've never quite gained true consensus and commitment from the team. So we went through it, and I introduced to them the concept of decentralized leadership. I worked with them for a couple days to talk through very much, if you're familiar with EOS or any strategic planning system, at its core, the outcome of that is generally some large vision, some clear kind of common core values. Then there's, whether it's 3 or 5 year kind of midterm goals, there's annual goals, quarterly goals, and then there's, some very focused, milestones and to-dos in between. There's lots of ways to get there. EOS is one, scaling up is another, 40X is another, yada, yada, yada. Well, decentralized leadership, our approach, my approach, it's just a different way. And the different way, it's more bottoms up than top down. So when we went through the process, we started with all the individuals and we said, okay, what do you think your priorities are? What are your individual core values? Are you guys in alignment with each other there? And we had a discussion around it. Then we said, okay, no, if we're going to win as a team or learn as a team, we need to start there, because we're not siloed individuals. We are a team here. So if we win as a team and learn as a team, what do we want to win next quarter? What does that look like as a team? And we set quarterly team priorities. Okay, what do we want to learn next quarter? And we set those as well. And then we said, okay, this is what our individual priorities are. This is what our team priorities are. Where do we see ourselves going a year from now, 3 years from now together? What's our end goal that we want to do? And the leader has to be there in that conversation. And we were able to set those more clear 3-year goals. The outcome of that was the team has never been more aligned. This is about 3 months ago. People are showing up and they're owning their priorities. They're owning their scorecard metrics, because that's part of the KPIs, as part of the discussion of priorities, and they're working together as a team better than they ever have. And it was just simply, they felt more bought in to that, what used to be a top-down driven vision, values, goals, priorities, how are you going to execute? Because now it was bottoms up. And they're having their fourth quarter better than they ever had, and they're planning the next year, and the team is super excited to show up and do the whole planning process again, where before they used to be very reluctant.
Awesome. One quick follow-up question on that is, if you're starting, so to speak, from the bottom up, how do you even get alignment when you're starting from like the individuals? How do you get alignment on, let's say, the core values, or on what those are? Because it's, it just could be such a variety. How do you get a team on the same page with some core values that are meaningful in some way, because they're not too diversified or whatever, from too many, just like, it's not going to be a collection of little things from a lot of people. So what I'll share is that we didn't once in the 7 to 8 sessions I've done this on with different teams in the last 3 to 4 months, not once do we talk about company core values. What we talk about is individual core values. And when you think about teams, it's all about, can I work well with this person? Mm-hmm. Now, organizations, I think I just read this yesterday or the day before, that, it's, as you build a tribe, you start to collect people that have shared core values over, they just naturally collect or don't collect. So maybe this is not as an EOS implementer or someone who's been around it before, this is very counter to how EOS would suggest, or other even strategic planning processes would suggest, going about getting a shared culture. But I'm telling you, from a practical standpoint, the teams are more aligned with sharing their own core values, personal core values, and how they've come out. We have a conversation. How do your core values show up in work? It's a way to better understand each other from a core value standpoint that are personalized. Now, does that conflict with the company's core values? Does it mean you shouldn't have company core values? No, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have company core values.
people generally aren't in that room if they don't share a company core value to begin with. And that's it. And if they're not sharing a company core value, it's really not a company core value. It's a ownership core value, because at the end of the day, most core values organizations are by the ownership, not by the team. It's not consensus. It's top-down driven. So by extension, if the owner has a core value that they're feeling is being not gelling with a member on their team, they'll get rid of the member on the team. So that's a touchy one for some people. That's my answer.
No,
there's a lot of people that would disagree, but I'm telling you, it works.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. Look, this is really helpful. Really appreciate you coming on here. And this is not one of these generic topics, right? This is a super interesting topic. It's a new concept, something I've been reading about from you, that you're speaking about recently. So really appreciate you coming on and delving into it. I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me, and I'll end by saying it's not I think of it as a different approach to the same outcomes, not a better approach. So I really make sure people understand the decentralized leadership. It's just a different way to get to the same place. And it's for some organizations, but it's not for all organizations.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Appreciate you clarifying that. And everybody else, I just say again, if you're a fractional executive, whether part of a firm or owning a firm or a solo practitioner in that field, invite you to, if you're already a member of Fractional Leadership, again, invite you to wait for information about that. You'll get information about the session with Rob Dubay, co-founder with Gino Wickman of the 10 Disciplines, talking about the 10 disciplines of how to maximize your energy. And if you're not already, if you're a fractional executive, but not already part of the fractional leadership community, definitely invite you to check that out, fractionalleadership.io. And again, we'll see everybody else on the other side. Thanks.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.